Let us start with the man who built an empire of theft so large that it had its own name. Mobutu Sese Seko ruled the Democratic Republic of Congo, which he renamed Zaire, from 1965 until 1997. That is 32 years. He came to power through a military coup with quiet backing from the CIA and Belgium, both of whom saw him as a useful tool against Soviet influence in Central Africa. Mobutu understood something early that most dictators take years to learn. The key to staying in power is not just controlling the army. It is making loyalty financially impossible to abandon. He paid his military generals directly from the state treasury. He appointed relatives and allies to every significant government position. He made the country's economy essentially his personal income stream. The numbers are staggering. Estimates of what Mobutu personally stole from Zaire range from 4 billion to 15 billion US dollars. Some estimates go higher. His personal fortune at its peak was comparable to Zaire's entire national debt. He owned a fleet of luxury aircraft, including a Concorde that he chartered specifically for shopping trips to Paris. He owned multiple palaces across Europe, including a castle in Portugal. He had a villa in the south of France. Meanwhile, Zaire, a country sitting on some of the richest mineral deposits in the world, including cobalt, coltan, gold, and diamonds, had people dying from diseases that cost a few dollars to treat. Infrastructure collapsed. Teachers went unpaid. The country's GDP fell almost continuously for decades. When Mobutu finally fled in 1997, dying of prostate cancer, chased out by a rebel force led by Laurent Désiré Kabila, he left behind a state so hollowed out that the new government essentially had to rebuild the concept of a functioning government from scratch. The West, which had propped him up for decades, watched quietly and moved on. Now, go to Equatorial Guinea and you find a different kind of theft, smaller country, smaller scale, same logic. Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo has ruled Equatorial Guinea since 1979. He took power by overthrowing and executing his own uncle. In a country of fewer than 2 million people, Obiang has remained president for over 45 years, making him the longest-serving non-royal head of state in the world at various points in his rule. Equatorial Guinea discovered significant offshore oil reserves in the 1990s. Almost overnight, the country became one of the wealthiest per capita on the African continent. The money started flowing. It flowed almost entirely to Obiang, his family, and his circle. His son, Teodorin, became Minister of Agriculture, a position he used to funnel oil money into a personal fortune estimated at hundreds of millions of dollars. U.S. Department of Justice investigations found that Teodorin had used corruption proceeds to buy a private jet worth $38 million, a yacht worth $120 million, a mansion in Malibu worth $30 million, and a collection of Michael Jackson memorabilia. The average citizen of Equatorial Guinea, sitting on top of all that oil wealth, still had some of the worst infant mortality rates and worst access to clean water in the region. The money was there, it just went somewhere else first. Nigeria deserves its own chapter in this story, not because it is the worst example, but because it is one of the most documented and most instructive. Sani Abacha ruled Nigeria from 1993 until his death in 1998. He died in somewhat mysterious circumstances, officially a heart attack, reportedly while in the company of Indian prostitutes, though the full truth was never publicly established. But what happened after his death is remarkable. Swiss banks, under international pressure, began disclosing the accounts held by his family and associates. What they found helped put a specific number on what Abacha had extracted from Nigeria during his 5 years in power. Approximately 2 to 5 billion US dollars, with some estimates going as high as 8 billion. This is a man who ruled for 5 years That is roughly $1 billion a year in a country where millions of people were living on less than $1 a day. The Abacha loot recovery became one of the most important cases in international anti-corruption history. Switzerland, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Liechtenstein all got involved. Hundreds of millions of dollars were eventually returned to Nigeria, though critics argued that the returned funds were not always well accounted for either. Abacha's methods were a textbook of authoritarian financial theft. He controlled the Central Bank of Nigeria as if it were a personal account. He appointed loyalists to key financial institutions. He used the oil sector. Nigeria was and is a major oil producer as a direct feeding ground. Security agencies were used not to protect citizens, but to silence journalists, activists, and political opponents who got too close to the truth. But there is one leader whose story carries a particular kind of weight, because he started as a genuine revolutionary, someone who people believed in deeply and turned into something else entirely. Robert Mugabe ruled Zimbabwe from independence in 1980 until his removal in a military coup in 2017. He is 37 years in power. He came in as a liberation hero, a man who had spent 11 years in prison for opposing white minority rule, who was educated, who spoke eloquently about democracy and reconciliation. He governed reasonably well for the first decade, and then the decline. The land redistribution program of the early 2000s, which began with a genuine historical grievance about land stolen during colonialism, spiraled into the seizure of thousands of white-owned farms in a way that was chaotic, politically motivated, and agriculturally devastating. Zimbabwe went from being called the breadbasket of Africa, it exported food to its neighbors, to experiencing food shortages within a few years. The inflation that followed is almost impossible to describe. Zimbabwe's annual inflation rate hit 79.6 billion% in November 2008. That is not a typo. Billion. People were carrying cash in wheelbarrows. The $100 trillion note became a real thing, a banknote that existed and bought almost nothing. Through all of this, Mugabe and his inner circle maintained comfortable lives. Grace Mugabe, his second wife, became internationally known as Gucci Grace for her luxury shopping trips abroad while the country collapsed. Reports of looting from state resources, farms, and diamond mining operations in the east of the country came consistently from journalists and opposition figures. Mugabe was eventually removed in November 2017, not by a popular uprising, but by the military acting in what they carefully called not a coup. He died under house arrest in 2019 at the age of 95 in Singapore, receiving medical treatment that most Zimbabweans could never have accessed. Mobutu Sese Seko, Teodoro Obiang, Sani Abacha, Robert Mugabe. 4 men, 4 countries, billions of dollars extracted. That is the real history here. Thanks for watching this video, and if you learned something, make sure to leave a like, comment down your thoughts on anything I discussed in this video, and subscribe if you'd like to see more like this one. Thank you.